Story 1. Flowing water. I spent my entire life living in towns near rivers. Every winter, people die. Every summer, people die. In winter, it's people who underestimated the cold. In summer, it's people who underestimated the flow. Story 2. This will probably get buried, but as an infectious disease physician, everything. I have had patients die from infections associated with simple things like playing with their dog or spending the day at a water park. Story 3. Buildings. I did structural inspections of new construction for years, and let me tell you, it's terrifying. It doesn't matter who built it or who paid for it. Every single public building you've ever been in has had corners cut either due to simple negligence or deliberately in the interest of saving time and money. Also, roads, for that matter. Story 4. Losing your job. Most people living alone, and especially single parents with no support network, are one paycheck away from their whole life unraveling. This kept me awake at night for around 20 years until my kids were independent. I don't know how single parents are coping with how things are right now, but my heart goes out to them. Story 5. The universe, comets in particular. We are not able to map out and track comets like we are asteroids until they are basically already coming at us. As a scary example, there was a comet a few decades ago that left holes in Jupiter's gas clouds that were bigger than the Earth itself. Now, could you imagine what would happen if that comet came towards us instead? There would be absolutely nothing that we could do. Anyway, do not take it from me. I got this from a Brian Cox interview for anyone interested in space and cosmology. Story 6. High voltage electricity can turn men into ash. Dangerous Goods worked with a guy who merely walked past a container of xanthates that was leaking. He acquired respiratory problems for life. Story 7. AI bias. Like seriously, we are feeding these artificial intelligence systems massive datasets, and those datasets are inherently biased, reflecting all the prejudices and inequalities of our own messed up world. Story 8. I didn't really experience such a thing until later in my life, and I was amazed at how these people could seem to be lovely and caring and how far they could go to reach their goals, and how absurd their goals could be. Also, how they could damage a whole family, even their own children. Really, if someone had told me before, I wouldn't have believed it. Story 9. Tuberculosis. Our oldest enemy and the most effective human predator. Silent and deadly, it can lie in wait for years before letting you know it's there, and then it will slowly eat away at you until you die. We do have a treatment, but the disease is still prevalent in poor countries and making a resurgence in developed nations like the United States. However, it kills people slowly enough to not raise alarms, not paralyze the economy, and not generate a coordinated effort to eradicate it. As a doctor, it is one of the few contagious diseases I am always wary of. You can be fully vaccinated and still contract the disease. Story 10. Food allergies can come out of absolutely nowhere, escalate dramatically, and make your favorite foods essentially poison, but no one else tends to care. Especially if it's something that is a ridiculously common ingredient and you are sensitive enough that breathing in or touching crumbs is enough for your immune system to react intensely. Sure, you will have epinephrine on hand after the first instance of a severe allergic reaction, but anaphylaxis is terrifying. Being on the receiving end of an epinephrine injection while still conscious is like suddenly going from being unable to breathe to feeling an intense rush, where you need to use that momentum to save your own life while being keenly aware of that fact. It's traumatic, and I hope none of you ever have to experience it. Story 11. People tend to think about wind and lightning when it comes to scary weather, but far more people die from water. The most damaging part of a hurricane, by far, is the storm surge, the water that the extreme low pressure of the storm carries along with it as it comes on shore, basically bringing the ocean miles inland. Massive amounts of rain can cause flooding when rivers overtake their floodplains. Flash flooding can bring water moving like a river down streets and carry cars, trees, and even buildings along with it. It doesn't take much for it to drag you under and drown you, and it can hide countless dangerous hazards in the mud and debris it's carrying, including the simple fact of how deep it is. People vastly underestimate it. Story 12. Dumb young kids trying to prove something to their peers, especially a gang. Don't mess with anyone wearing gang clothes, covered in what look like gang tattoos, or just give off a vibe. They might be a poser, they might be a punk and the biggest wimp ever. Or they might pull out a gun and shoot you. Just not worth it. If it's not necessary, don't engage, walk away, de-escalate. Story 13. I get nightmares that I struggle to tell apart from reality, often involving friends or family leaving me and doing the worst things I could imagine. I've woken up several times needing to throw up or wishing I could just die to make it easier. I have lost friends because I remember reprehensible things they did that never happened. In middle school, I refused to talk to anyone because I thought they'd all try to get me suspended or mock me incessantly, which came from a recurring nightmare I had for years. Nowadays, my sleep is sporadic. I'll sleep for 4 hours a day or 14 hours a day. Sometimes I wake up in a literal puddle of sweat. Sometimes I wake up 4 times in a dream before I can even wake up in real life once. Sometimes I wake up in real life but feel like whatever nightmare I just had has already happened and then I'm destitute or paralyzed, which can take an hour or more to wear off. Nightmares were always told to me to be something that kids had that made them not want to sleep. They can be way, way worse. The only positive thing is that I do not get fazed by anything that happens in real life anymore, and I spend a lot of waking hours just happy that I am awake and doing okay for myself. Your boss yelling at you to hit an impossible deadline goes over way better when you woke up that morning from a dream in which he fired you for leaning back in your chair. Story 14. Relying on digital versus physical media and currency. Once we go completely over to digital media only, the companies get full control over what we are allowed to watch. Once we go completely over to digital currency only, the governments get full control over our money. And before anyone tries to be a smart aleck and say, they already have, they do not. They do have a lot of control, but that is no excuse to give them more. I collect physical movies, shows, games, comics, and books. I use physical money whenever I can. And I will continue this for as long as I can. But people are foolish. I expect us to be completely dependent on digital things within the next 50 years. Because people just cannot realize until it is too late that this will lead to horrible dystopian consequences. Story 15. The thought that the decisions we make today can have irreversible consequences in the future. Sometimes we don't realize how a small change can completely alter the course of our life, and the worst thing is that we cannot go back. Story 16. I needed to pass a test to get a scuba certification. I needed to pass 2 tests to get a driver's license. It took me over 100 hours just to fly solo. I needed to pass another test to get my boater certification. I had to complete 3 tests to apply pesticides. You know what I needed 0 competence for? Or take a test for? Buying an assault rifle. Walked out the door with it and 10 boxes of ammunition. All in one morning. Story 17. Having an implanted defibrillator and having it start going off. I have one implanted in my chest because I have atrial fibrillation. I rarely have atrial fibrillation events, but when I do, the device will deliver a 600-volt shock to my heart in an effort to restore it to regular rhythm. I had an event in 2019 where it started going off. I called 911 immediately. By the time the ambulance arrived and administered intravenous medications to me, it had shocked me 41 times, with about a minute between each shock. Have you ever seen a TV show about the emergency room where they use paddles on a person and their whole body gets rocked? Yeah, that. 41 times. Story 18. Having a slight allergy. There's no predicting when you might go from, that's a bit itchy to, oh no, I can't breathe and I don't have an epinephrine injector. Asthma, for much the same reasons. And cat scratches or bites, going from, that's a bit red and sore to, I have blood poisoning and might die. Story 19. That unless you somehow acquire a lot of money, you are going to spend an unjustifiably large part of your life working and then have a few years to do what you want in old age. Also, the majority of that time you will have to mingle with a society that is a constant source of aggravation and continuously makes you feel mentally drained. You are welcome. Story 20. As a doctor, I have 3 answers. 1. Pregnancy and childbirth. It is, for me, one of the most inhumane things a human has to endure. Urinary tract infection. One day it's just a nagging pain when you pee. Next week it could ascend to the kidney cause it's a fail and toxins accumulate within your body, while your doctor struggles to find the answer because urinary tract infections can be very stealthy. Poorly educated people with questionable morals who doubt and are against modern medicine. Story 21. War. There's nothing romantic about being a soldier, especially when the ones that lead you make you do inhumane things even if the people are innocent or don't even deserve it. That scar might make you look like a badass. But at what cost? Are guns really that cool? What about actually using them? You're also glorifying hunger, rape, torture, losing a loved one, and exploding into uneven parts of meat when you romanticize being a soldier. I'm telling you. Story 22. Concussions. People often consider concussions as a small bump on the head that gets better after a couple of days of resting. In reality, concussions are a traumatic brain injury. Many people who suffer from them have lifelong complications and side effects that can impact things like vision, hearing, and cognition. To add insult to injury in these cases, when people hear that you can't work because you had a concussion 2 years ago, they don't take you seriously because they don't understand how serious concussions can be. This can be very isolating and frustrating for the person dealing with the consequences of that concussion. In reality, they are incredibly serious and can be permanently disabling. Always wear your helmet when you're riding anything with wheels that's not enclosed. Story 23. That the people you trust to know what they are doing or are in charge of some aspect of your life have no idea what they are doing and are just winging it. I think most people are in their 30s when they realize this is true about their parents. Story 24. Antibiotic resistance. People do not really realize that using antibiotics when not prescribed not only damages you but other people as well. I have seen people die from infections from simple injuries because of resistance to antibiotics. Not to mention how expensive it is. Story 25. Your own body. It can decide to die for some obscure reason that literally no one understands until after you are dead and they examine you to find out. And then they still might not. You literally live in a ticking time bomb made of meat. Story 26. When someone grabs your arm to help you cross a road and you're blind or visually impaired, most people don't ask for consent first and just grab and push you, so at that point you have no idea what their intentions are, and you don't have enough visual information to be sure of their body language or facial expressions. On another note, if you grabbing me saves my life or potentially does, then go for it. A lady grabbed me last night as I was finding the edge of the path with my foot, having already found it with my cane, and she thought I was going to walk into traffic. I just let her know I was okay and what I was doing, and she apologized, and we both went on our way. Much less terrifying than being pushed into a road when you are not confident it's safe. Story 27. Measles. The virus can stay in your brain for years and reactivate, and if it does, there is no cure for the resulting brain infection which leads to death. Every time I have friends who say they are thinking of skipping the measles, mumps, and rubella vaccination for their kids, I tell them this. Story 28. Too much of it in one sitting can kill you. Look up the amount and it's surprisingly small even for a 100-kilogram person. This is why you should never drink seawater, even in a survival situation. Story 29. Lithium batteries. They are in almost all portable devices, power tools, scooters, and electric vehicles. They can cause fires, explosions, and release toxic gases. Very difficult to extinguish once they enter an uncontrollable self-heating state. Story 30. The United States of America is losing its grip. If it is happening, they will traverse the route of all waning empires. The loss of control will press the politicians to expand territory. War is inevitable, and Canada is ripe for the United States, which will draw the ire of all of Europe and then some. Story 31. Not having a backup for your cloud-stored data. The feeling when you find out your data was wiped from your account and all your family photos and important documents are gone.